right. Well, we're going to keep things rolling here. I know some of you are still getting your beers there in the back and having a little bit of conversation. Plenty of time for that after this this final feature panel. Condensed version of what we usually do at our Brewbound session, which is an all-day event. So we're not we're not used to squeezing things into an hour and a half.
Have to go be an asshole.
I did want to introduce our next panelists here and our gracious host, Tomme Arthur, the co-founder of Lost Abbey. He's been not only gracious enough to open his doors to us tonight, but he's kind of helped guide this next discussion topic and really framed it up quite nicely. Chad Heath, he's the director of Southern California sales for Stone Distributing. So he's going to provide some really good insight into what the San Diego market, craft beer market, is like. And then Tom Nickel, a well-recognized figure in San Diego beer, in the San Diego beer scene. He's the owner of O'Brien's Pub, as it says on his shirt. One of the better beer bars here in San Diego. And he's going to add a nice retailer perspective to what's happening in San Diego with craft. So hopefully over the next 40 or so minutes, we'll be able to explain the equilibrium that exists between all of the competition and some of the collaboration that happens here in San Diego. Touched on it a little bit at the end of our last panel there, but with the amount of new local startups, established local players, and all the outside beer companies that want to sell their beer in San Diego, there's a pretty big fight for shelf space. And San Diego is one of the country's most dynamic craft beer markets. So we're going to look at how beer companies continue to build that loyal customer base and how you become sort of the local brand with so much competition. So Tomme, why don't we start by discussing some of the factors that have enabled San Diego itself to become such a hotbed for craft beer. I don't know, maybe touch on some of the cultural and civic factors that led to San Diego being known for craft.
Check.
There we go.
We on?
Yep.
Okay. Just leave it out. I think one of the biggest things, and there's two things that come to mind for me, and Jeff was up here, Tom's up here, and myself, we're all native San Diegans, which is pretty odd in the scheme of things. There aren't a lot of people in this town that actually grew up in San Diego. And so there's a transient community of people that came to San Diego in the last 15, 20, 30 years who understood craft beer or understood beer from their location and are now looking to embrace that, and that's been a big part of it. The other part that I think really came into play in the last 10 years is just the sheer amount of new breweries that came on board. We're about 7 years, a little over 7 years into our process here at Port Brewing, the Lost Abbey, and the amount of breweries that have come along since we opened our doors 7 years ago is staggering. I don't even know what the number is, but I'm guessing it's in the high 30s. So even though we have a legacy in the 7 years that we've been open, it's still not as rich as a lot of the breweries that preceded us and some of the breweries that are even come from behind us. But the amount of breweries that have opened in the last 7 to 10 years, even the last 2 to 3 years, is really what's transitioned the community here for sure.
Right. Chad and Tom, why don't you offer your thoughts on how craft became such a big thing in San Diego?
Well, I think Tomme hit it right on the head. There were so many really amazing breweries that opened up here recently that it just became the hot spot for craft beer. And I think it was Portland, and now it shifted down to San Diego. And I use the terms quite a bit that this is the Napa for beer in San Diego. And I think between the culture, the camaraderie, the creativity that was coming out of a lot of the craft breweries here in San Diego, that just kind of manifested itself into this amazing town with just awesome breweries.
Right. And Tom, from as a retailer, I mean, what have you seen over the last 10 years?
One of the things I've thought about the San Diego beering scene is that we came up kind of late. You look at some of the breweries that are celebrating that class of '88 barley wine collaboration they're doing across lots of breweries. North Coast, Deschutes, lots of great Oregon and Northern California breweries. And Karl Strauss is our oldest brewery at 89, and a lot of the breweries that we think of as big breweries today were like 95, 96. And I think opening a little later forced us to do something a little different than the pale ales and amber ales that were kind of happening at that time. And I feel like we took our brewing, you know, kind of in a little bit of a different direction because of that. And that kind of helped us differentiate ourselves from a lot of the other breweries that blossomed in the mid-90s.
Interesting. So for you guys, it seems like you're hitting on this brewery end of things, that it was the influx of breweries, it was the differentiation in style, but how about some of the maybe more civic factors? I mean, I know you guys have an outgoing mayor that was very receptive to craft, and you know, who knows what's going to happen going forward with the new mayor, but have they made... Hey, I didn't know that was going to get such a response.
He appreciates your civicness.
But, you know, I mean, have the city planning officials made it easier for breweries to sprout up here? I mean, take us through some of the back-end operations that have allowed craft to become what it is.
So we're located here in San Marcos, which is in the county of San Diego. San Marcos has not been as proactive as other counties in San Diego, and to our west is Vista. There are more breweries operating in Vista today than there are in San Marcos. That being said, the city of San Diego, under our former mayor, Jerry Sanders, did a really good job of understanding that tourism and the ability of breweries to generate a lot of interest and drive people to San Diego was a big deal. And they created a lot of redevelopment districts and zones, and those redevelopment districts actually forced or offered breweries opportunities to expand into areas that may not have been their primary focus. I know for a fact that the guys from Coronado and even Jacob with Modern Times and lots of other breweries in this town are taking advantage of redevelopment district opportunities, which present the ability to save, whether it's through workforce, labor, taxation, just opportunities that we don't have in San Marcos. But that's what's making the city actually grow as a whole, because there's all these districts going on, and every time a brewery opens up in one of these districts, it keeps spreading out the culture of beer.
Right, and just one quick note before I ask you guys to touch on that. Since 2011 in San Diego, breweries have more than doubled the amount of breweries, and San Diego is the second biggest city in California. It's 8th in the U.S., so there's a large number of craft beer drinkers here. And to your point, the craft beer scene generates, I think, almost upwards of $300 million annually brings in $300 million to the city. More than the recent Comic-Con event, which I've been told that if you've ever wanted to wear a cape in San Diego, that's the time to put your cape on. And that generates anywhere from 180 to about 200 million. So craft beer is you know, a big economic driver here in San Diego. Tom, maybe tell us from a retail perspective, I mean, how has that helped your business?
Well, I mean, it's obviously great for my business. You know, the main thing to me is, you know, high water floats all boats. You know, I've, you know, went back, there was a period in like 2003, we were literally one of the only what you would consider beer bars in the county. You know, there was maybe like 4 or 5 county-wide that you would consider dedicated to craft beer. And, you know, you talk about the number of breweries doubling since 2011, and the number of craft beer bars has probably doubled since 2011. You know, I feel like there's been a real synergy between the growth of tap space and the growth of the breweries. You know, but we were talking about this before the panel started, that at some point that tap handle growth is going to flatten out.
Right.
And, you know, that's where, you know, we've got to be headed at some point, even as the breweries continue to open. You know, how much more can we expand the tap space when there's so many good beer bars around the county and so many places that never embraced local beer or embraced craft beer, you know, open up to 20 or 30 taps and start pouring, you know, the Ballast Points, Greenstones, you know, ports of the world. But at some point that trend ends. You know, I don't think there's just infinite tap space in San Diego, and I know Chad's got some, you know, really great details on how LA is growing and how LA still can grow. But, you know, our business has grown every single year since we took over the pub in 2003. And I mean, like I said, you imagine the number, you know, the amount of increased competition we've been facing from other bars, but it hasn't, you know, all it's done is increase the number of potential customers we have.
Right, interesting. So Chad, I mean, maybe enlighten us a little bit. I mean, drilling holes in the wall and putting more tap handles into the same amount of real estate at a bar is one thing. Doubling the amount of bars is a completely different thing. How many different points of distribution, especially at the on-premise level, have you seen increase over the years here in San Diego?
Well, I've been with Stone almost 5 years now, and when I first started, Los Angeles was an afterthought. It was something that we kind of sent some beer up there, we were selling some beer up there, and we made a conscious effort to say we want to focus in Los Angeles and really grow that market. And since then, we've added about 2,000 different points of distribution just up in Los Angeles alone. With the split between on-premise versus off-premise, it's about equal, and it's been equal for quite a while. What's interesting is when you look at the type of growth that we see between our on-premise and our off-premise channel of business, right? If you look at the on-premise, historically on-premise has been growing much faster than the off-premise side of things, especially down here in San Diego. But then all of a sudden when LA started catching on to this little company called Total Wine & More came into Orange County and into Los Angeles, and that was a game changer for them. Their goal is to really put the herd on BevMo, and regardless whether you agree with that or disagree with it, they do an amazing job at getting beer into the public out there. So by them coming in, and to Tom's point, all water rising in a high tide, all boats rising in a high tide, they have changed how people sell beer up in Orange County and Los Angeles. So on the off-premise side, they're really changing how things go. On the on-premise side, it used to just be the coastal communities, right? We would look at Beverly Hills and Santa Monica, Long Beach, that market for craft beer, and then recently it's moved inland. So you look at Pasadena, West Hollywood, East Lake Village, those markets are going crazy now. And that's really helped us be able to sell a lot more differentiated brands up in Los Angeles compared to what we see down here in San Diego.
So you're seeing a lot of growth in LA, both at the on and off premise level, but how about in San Diego? I mean, is San Diego keeping up with LA's growth for as far as points of distribution go?
No, it's not. It's what we consider more of a mature marketplace, and Tom's spot on. When you look at how many new restaurants have opened in San Diego and how many new liquor stores have opened in San Diego, it pales in comparison, no pun, to what's going on up in Los Angeles and how many new locations are opening up there. So where we added 2,000 points of distribution roughly up in Los Angeles, we probably added hundreds of points of distribution down in San Diego. The difference is in San Diego, a lot of the big volume moving companies, mainly chain restaurants, are now starting to embrace craft, whereas that's not happening up in Los Angeles yet. So that's kind of the life cycle of people catching on to craft beer. They start out with beer or bars like Tom's that he's got that does an amazing job at getting really unique, awesome beers out to his fans. But when you look at a chain like Islands or Red Robin, you know, they're just recently now starting to catch on to craft beer, and that's a very recent phenomenon. And when they catch on, they move a lot of beer.
Real quick,
yeah.
One of the coolest things for us as a producer is that LA is 7 million people, I think, or whatever the number is. It's a lot of people, and it's a lot of people that aren't drinking craft beer just yet. And if we were in the Mid-Atlantic, if Boston, you know, that would be a whole new territory or state for us. And so while there's a lot of people in LA, but our distributor is already working up there. So we don't have to do a lot of extra work as a producer to sell more beer in an environment. We don't have to go educate the staff to do the things because they're already familiar with the brand. So now it's just a matter of saying, it's almost like having a launch. It's like, look, we're going to launch to a new contiguous state next door, but at the same time, we're already familiar with their footprint and how they go about their business. It's a huge upside for us to say, look, LA is huge. We're going to play in LA, and we don't have to do a lot of extra work to sell more beer through them in that territory. It's an awesome opportunity for us to be a part of that.
And probably the biggest market dynamic between Los Angeles and San Diego, everyone's trying to fight for their localness here in San Diego, right? LA, nothing's local. They're not brand loyal as much in Los Angeles as they are down here in San Diego. They're more willing to try different styles of beers and Belgian beers and pales and IPAs or whatever, but there's not the brewery footprint in Los Angeles, nowhere near it, than there is down in San Diego. And so that definition of local, what's your definition of local? Is it 10 miles outside of your brewery? Is it 2 hours outside of your brewery? What is it, right? So I think that term local, frankly, gets overused a lot instead of just focusing on what's interesting and what's unique and what's creative and what's awesome. That's what we try and sell when we go out to talk to people about interesting new beers that are coming out of the marketplace. We try not to regionalize it too much.
You know, when I travel to the East Coast, because you guys are, 2 hours on the East Coast is local. Like if you're Dogfish Head and you're in Delaware, 2 hours in either direction is local. You're in Philadelphia, that's local enough. For us in San Diego, we can play in LA and be local on a 2-hour level.
And people that live in LA, they go, wow, you came from San Diego? How long was that drive? I mean, they just, right? They feel San Diego's on an island, which is good and bad. If you play that up as you're marketing your brand and getting your beer out to that marketplace, you can use that to your advantage. And that's something that we're trying to tap into and get much better at.
So how about for some of these smaller startup brands that are getting off the ground here in San Diego? It would seem to me like if I were a brewery owner here in San Diego, I would want to probably look at a market like LA much sooner than I would if I started my brewery in Boston and wanted to look at New York. Relatively the same distance, same amount of time to get there. Do new breweries need to look to other markets in California faster here if they're launching in San Diego because of all the competition?
That's a good one for you.
Well, I think part of that just depends on, looking at what your market plan is. I think the biggest game changer in San Diego over the last 10 years is the advent of brewery tasting rooms. Carl Strauss, when they opened up their corporate facility in Rose Canyon, Chris Kramer said their biggest mistake was not anticipating that people would want to come visit the brewery. And now they've rebuilt it and added a tasting room. And so, a lot of these breweries are making it on, selling, some beer in the local market, but, kind of functioning as a bar.
Was it Blair coined it the garage brewery?
Yeah, like the garage brewery, where these guys are making beer, selling it on site, getting $4 or $5 a pint, and that's where 60-70% of their income is coming from, even if it's only 20 or 30% of their total volume. And I mean, that's a huge difference, because if you look at the number of beer bars that have opened, then you look at the number of craft beer tasting rooms that have opened, and the number of outlets to go get good beer are insane. I mean, how many beers can you get on tap here?
22.
22. Green Flash had 19 on tap the other day. That's a huge difference, and it kind of depends on what your model is. Do you want to kind of be a smaller, local, just distribute in San Diego, sell beer in your tasting room in a local neighborhood? And that's where I still think there's a lot of room for growth. There's a lot of underserved communities. Encinitas doesn't have a brewery. La Mesa doesn't have a brewery. Lots of parts of East San Diego don't have a brewery.
The guys in Grantville just got 3, right?
Yeah, Grantville now has 3.
4 actually with San Diego, so 4.
Yeah, but so, there's still areas in town where you could open up a brewery. Olive Fallbrook Brewing Company, Ramona,
not San Marcos.
Chuckaluk, not San Marcos,
okay.
But and have a brewery that serves a very local community and then distributes a small amount of beer to kind of make ends meet. If you're looking on having 10, 15, 20,000 barrels, you have to look outside of San Diego. We have a friend up in Oregon at Boneyard Brewing Company. He sells 10,000 barrels of beer, all draft, all in Oregon.
Wow.
That's not going to happen in San Diego anymore. What's that?
A little in Seattle.
Oh, yeah, a little bit of beer in Seattle. But that's not going to happen in San Diego. You're not going to see that. You're going to need to move beyond the local market in order to grow. Because, I know we get inundated with requests for new brewery events, and we like to, introduce a new brewery, put a bunch of beers on tap. We'll throw on 6 or 7 beers. That's great. You have an event. But, and then you can do that at lots of different beer bars. But then it's all about getting those beer bars to reorder. What's the beer they like? What's the beer that's going to stick? What's the beer that's going to be different from what everybody else is brewing? Is your stout better? Is your porter better? Do you have a Belgian beer that's better, a sour, a hoppy beer? What is it that's going to move you forward in the marketplace that doesn't exist? And where do you find that kind of permanent tap handle? Because when Stone and AleSmith and Ballast Point started up, it was all about finding permanent tap handles. You weren't looking for somebody to just buy 1 keg and then take it off. But that's kind of the reality of the marketplace now, is people want to change things up.
You have 20 tap handles total.
Yeah.
Totally available every week to all the breweries, not only in this town, but in everybody that's putting pressure on you.
Yeah.
20 handles. How many of them don't rotate?
Only 5 or 6.
Yeah.
And
So how do you build a brand? If all those tap handles are constantly rotating, I mean, and there's 50, 60, 70 breweries here in San Diego, how do you build a brand?
Gee, Chad, how do you build a brand these days?
Yeah, thanks. Now I know.
It's not our job anymore, right? It's
Yeah,
the distributor's
exactly.
job.
So okay, fallacy number 1. It's
Fallacy
not
number
all
1,
the
it's not our
distributor's
job.
So
It's not my
that's
job.
A good point to remember.
All right.
I think a couple of points I want to touch on. To Tom's point, the tasting bar is a huge part of the business when you're opening up a new brewery. But it's also a great place to test out different beer styles to find out what you truly want to go to market and launch to help build that brand, right? You're going to stay draft only, you're going to can, you're going to bottle, you're going to do bombers, you're going to do 750 cage, what are you going to do, right? What's your market strategy? The breweries that are coming out now face a really steep hill to climb. They really do. It's a different hill than what we had to climb at Stone and at Port Lost Abbey. It's just so much competition right now. There's only so much shelf space in the off-premise world. Go to any one of your favorite liquor stores or Bevmo or whatever, you go, how much more can these stores handle, right, before it goes away? So I think you really need to come up with something that's unique. If you're building a brewery and you think, I make the best IPA on the planet and I'm going to kill it in San Diego, you're gonna have a tough.
You're gonna be number 12 in line.
Yeah, you're gonna have a tough time finding a distributor or finding someone that's really gonna support your brand and build it. I think that if you've got a unique beer that other breweries aren't focusing on, that might be unique and interesting and something that you can get some traction with, great, then let's go with that, right?
As long as it's not lager.
I don't know, even then, but it depends on the lager that you're making. But as long as it's yellow, fizzy, less lager.
I'll give you that.
Yeah, fair enough. But it's tough. We distribute a lot of brands at Stone Distributing because everyone said no, by the way. That's why we have our own distribution business. Nobody would say yes to carrying Stone. So we're like, well, let's start our own little company and we'll get a Ford Astro van and we'll put a keg and a case in there. And today now we'll do, 1.8 million cases coming out of our 2 warehouses this year. So it's gotten pretty big. But growing brands, you've got to have feet on the street. You've got to have people that are out there working with your wholesaler to help speak the story about their brewery and their brand and what your positioning is. It used to be that the distributor could do all of it if you found a good distributor, which is rare. We deal with over 100 distributors at Stone. We have problems with all of them at some point in time, including Stone Distribution, by the way. We're also, we have problems with Stone and they have problems with us, and I use that tongue-in-cheek.
Before you get away from that,
yeah,
I think there's 2 things that are really, and Tom mentioned it and Chad's reinforced it. I think there's 2 things that come up these days. One is that there's a lot of breweries that are opening up that have no idea what their brand is.
Exactly.
And it's incredible because it used to be self-serving. You could open your doors and find your brand. Right. You could get lucky and every so often a blind squirrel finds a nut. You can't open these days without a brand. And I see it, there's a lot of breweries that don't have a brand. And then they go to the distributor and they say, well, why won't you carry my brand? And the distributor goes, we won't carry your beer, you don't have a brand. And it gets to be this very hurtful conversation. The ones that are successful these days that are opening have at least a vision towards what the brand is. The challenge is that the tasting room, or what we call the Scott Blair model, the micro taster, whatever, the new tasting room model is actually reversing that, because you can open up without a brand and still be successful enough because the tasting room will support your business, but then you want to understand, well, why can't I get distribution, or why can't get someone to realize that my brand has relevance? Well, your brand doesn't have relevance, your tasting room has relevance because it's a community thing.
The tasting room is the brand.
The tasting room is completely the brand, and somewhere in between is the fall line. And there's breweries that have been around 20 years that have weak brands, there's 20 years that have established brands, and there's people that opened up yesterday that have established brands, and a lot of guys that opened up garage tasting rooms. Somewhere in between is the reality of beer. I say this all the time, our job as brewers is to be in the business of beer, which means we're in the business of staying in business. And sometimes you can be in this business as a garage brand and you can stay in business, but 5 years from now, there may not be any more relevancy than when you opened your doors. Does that make you important? No, it just makes you part of the community.
Right. Yeah, also on the tasting bar side of things, one thing I want to caution people on is if you have a tasting bar and you open it up and you're like, but this beer flies out of our tasting bar, okay, realize that you guys are having an influence on that, right? It's another thing to Tommy's point. If you have a brand and a story, it's got to pull off the shelf. It's got to pull off of Tom's tap handles. You're there selling it at a tasting bar. It's not always going to be that way when you hit the market. So that's why having a brand and having a message and having a brand identity is critical. It's really important.
I don't know of a single brewery brand in the world that doesn't have beer go bad on a shelf, including the biggest breweries from Budweiser down to you guys, including us. There isn't a brewery that I know of that doesn't have 100% pull. So even though you create a great brand, Sierra Nevada, New Belgium, your beer is going to go bad somewhere. And that's a massive lesson that I think people don't understand. No, we make beer, it should be all gone. It doesn't always work that way.
It's not build it and they will come.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely seems like I'm noticing more and more that old beer is a problem, or not fresh beer is a problem. And old beer in the marketplace is probably one of the biggest concerns in the industry right now. So I know it's a little bit of a tangent here, but
It's a good one.
How much old beer are you guys seeing in the marketplace, and what do you do about it?
Well, it's becoming a significant problem down in San Diego. Kind of my bad analogy is 5 years ago, if I wanted to find a really good beer, I had 2 places I could go, right? Flash forward to today, I have 12 places now that I can go in that same radius and find that same really good beer. So the beer sales are up, but the velocity at any given one account is falling. And so we have to, there's a couple things I will mention. Don't be ashamed of your date coding, okay? Code your bottles. Don't hide what it is. Don't make it a secret. Tell people this is best by this date. That's critical to your beer being fresh, and when people experience your beer, that they have an awesome experience with it, right? And it's mainly an off-premise problem. I'm not seeing it too much on the on-premise side at all. In fact, I don't think I've ever seen an old keg, unless it got lost in the back of someone's cold box, but it's off-premise. Limited shelf space, you've got to pull it out. So yeah, we swap it out. It's part of a distributor's job to make sure that the beer is fresh, that it's in code, that it's on the shelf, and you rotate it out. It's the one very few legal things you can do in California is to swap that beer out and make sure you put fresh beer on there.
So what I'm seeing then is a huge dichotomy. Lots of new brands, problems with old beer. I guess the question really is...
Wait, you forgot the consumer wants the new thing.
That's
Shiny
the
new
question.
thing.
Okay.
Yeah,
Right.
shiny new thing.
Right,
Are
because that's the big
are
crux.
craft breweries growing at a faster rate than their consumer base?
The number of them in San Diego is right now.
Yeah.
You know, because I think Chad spoke to it. It's the velocity. You know, how much beer can you sell and produce in town? And I think a lot of the phenomenal growth that the bigger breweries are certainly seeing, over 5,000 barrels, is happening somewhere other than San Diego. And like Mission Brewing Company, for example, they make 4,000 or 5,000 barrels of beer, but they distribute in 8 states. You know, and that would never have happened 10 or 15 years ago. If you made 4,000 or 5,000 barrels of beer, you would have sold all of that in San Diego, and it just speaks to the level of competition that they're facing selling beer right here.
I think it's the fireworks show. It's pretty pictures and things exploding, and and you're like, ooh, that was a really good finale. But the issue is, and one of the things that we're most pleased with is we sell about 35% of all of our beer in San Diego and LA through Stone Distributing. And our core value with these guys is very high. It's actually higher than any other distributor we have. So our biggest distributor has our best core totals. So to us, that's a great environment. And Chad mentioned there's a lot of times when you have distributors and you hand select all the marriages you get into, but sometimes they don't sell the beer the way you want them to. And we have a lot of markets where our core is being underserved, and they sell the easy button, which is when we send the new firework and it explodes and people are like, cool, and it gets on the shelf and it goes out the door. It's gotten really difficult to be core central these days, and even for the biggest breweries. I know that Sierra Nevada has issues selling pale ale in a way that they never used to have, and you guys probably don't sell as much core as you used to, and you can speak to it. Somewhere in there you have to have a fall line between what you're comfortable with, what you want to do in terms of driving that, and understanding where the line between explosive new fireworks and pop rocks is, and we still have to sell the non-sexy Levitations of the world. And that drives business. It drives tap handles, it drives consistency at Red Robin, it drives consistency at Chili's, and any other bar in town. You've got to have stuff that goes off on a regular basis, because if you don't, we do this. And we are classic. We see lots of spikes in our business based upon all the seasonal beers that we produce, and months are up and months are down. Months are up, but there's a core line that you have to hit. And that's what we try to hold to the distributor.
I think to answer your question, not yet. I think that the growth is still there. I think that there is still a lot of market share that needs to be captured from the craft community, and I still see that we have a lot of suppliers that are struggling to keep up with the demand that we could give to them, right?
Really?
In San Diego.
Is it core or is it everything?
Well, it's core, frankly, in some cases.
So then why the problem of old beer?
Like I said, if you sell a 25 case stack, 25 case stack of old beer, 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 25 case sta in a store that had no problem moving a 25K stack 5 years ago, but you didn't pay attention to your velocity on that particular store, and you didn't realize that there's 15 other stores within a 2-mile radius that are also selling 25 cases a week or whatever it is, right? It's going out of code because the velocity at that one store, you're not paying close enough attention to. So we instruct our sales team, we're like, look guys, careful. If you're gonna put a 15K stack up there, you better be selling 30 cases every other week because we want that beer out of there and be very fresh. We get some flack once in a while for Costco, right? They're like, hey, how come your beer is being sold in Costco? It's not refrigerated, it's on the shelf. That pallet is gone in probably a week to 10 days. So velocity is there, no problem with it. You just have to make sure you're looking at where you're putting the beer. And the independents struggle with this too because as grocery catches up with it, they've got more beer in inventory, they're not paying attention to it, they're not rotating it correctly. The next thing you know, they got out of cold beer. So,
and grocery's putting a lot of warm beer in play.
Grocery's putting a lot of bombers, especially warm beer out there. Warm, I don't like that term. It's still climate controlled, but nonetheless, it's not as bad as other places.
Shelf available, climate controlled, whatever.
Save it.
So that's a lot of the off-premise, but I mean, how about the concerns from the on-premise? I mean,
the only concern on-premise is the availability of beer. You know, these guys are making so much money putting beer in a bottle, shipping it to other states that, you know, there was a point where you definitely saw the availability of draft beer go down as, you know, like I said, you know, before it was like half a dozen places. Oh yeah, you can get a full keg of this, you know, anytime you want. And now, you know, it's like, oh no, we're shipping all that out of state, or that's all going into bottles, or oh, we're only putting that in 5 gallons. You know, so I think that in that sense, the competition is that, you know, it's just, they've got some bars fighting for the availability of beer where, you know, the amount that's staying here is limited. And like I said, you know, when you're serving it in a tasting bar, selling it in bottles, you know, and certainly, you know, internet beer sites, people shipping and trading beer, you know, so it's moving all over the place. Like if you go look at the internet for rate beer for Alpine, you know, it's all these people, DC, growler from this guy, Chicago, you know, it's all over the place. And, you know, so I think that, you know, you've got an ever-increasing number of bars fighting for, you know, an amount of beer that's not increasing at the same pace because there's demand for it so many different places, which is helping to drive growth. But, you know, overall, what's happening is there's just so many good beers, you know, so we may not be able to get as much of this, but now all of a sudden, you know, this year we're able to get Society, you know, which wasn't the case, you know, even just 15 months ago, and that's a great beer. And so, you know, there are definitely beers stepping up and filling those roles, but, you know, I definitely think that, you know, what you're finding is that there'll be some bars that serve certain breweries and some bars that serve other breweries, and you're finding, you know, as bars and breweries kind of pair up and, you know, who's doing what for whom, that, you know, it's not that, oh, we never serve that beer or we only serve this beer. It's just that, you know, relationships are forming and, you know, things are maybe more set in stone than they were 5 or 6 years ago when it's like, oh, we're serving everybody, and, you know, maybe now you can't get everything you want from every single brewery.
But you're getting more of that one brewery you want, which
well,
is
especially too with some of the out-of-town breweries. I mean, you know, Cantillon to me is a perfect case in point. 10 years ago, they were giving away Cantillon, and now you can't even get it. You know, we have to beg to get, you know, a case here and there. And that's just not a problem we have. That's everybody in San Diego. It mostly stays on the East Coast or in Chicago, and, you know, that's just a specialty beer we can't get. And that doesn't affect local production, but, you know, it does mean that we're fighting over, you know, kind of the same pile of beers with an ever-increasing number of places.
It's the finite resource.
So this is actually a good time to ask a question we got on Twitter. Do you think the number of new breweries and brands in the marketplace is helping grow the craft market or hindering the growth of some of the bigger players?
I think the thing that we all talk about is what's the right number, or what is the number. I mean, we're over 70, right?
Yeah.
We're somewhere north of 70 breweries in this county, and the question is what's the fall line between the way we've been playing the game or the way that you come to the playground and this is how the rules were established, whether it was what you guys did back in the day, or, you know, the dynamic has changed and the landscape changes with new distributorships and new breweries and pressure, and the biggest issue I see right now for the local market is the amount of new breweries bringing draft-only presence to the table, which is changing a lot of the rules, which is when you say now you have to send more beer out to bottles or further flung. There's a finite amount of places you can put beer on tap in this town if you want to keep a tap handle or if you want to be relevant. I don't know how much beer we pour outside of O'Brien's, but we pour a decent amount of Mongo there every week.
Yeah.
But there are places where we used to go through a keg of Mongo a week, and now it takes every 3 weeks to get that keg back in. And Chad can speak to this. The rotational aspect of what's become the business has become the issue. That the crux of it is, how frequently are you going to get back to that spot you used to be every 2 weeks? Or did you have a keg every week? Or now are you every 4 weeks? And that's what's happened, which is great. Lots of new breweries, fireworks, etc. We're the new thing. But are we a heritage brand? Are we a new brand? Are we a legacy brand? What is it that makes our brewery have relevance at O'Brien's? Great price, great predictability, great everything. Cool, he wants 2 kegs a week. But the guy down the street doesn't want any part of it because he's pouring 2 kegs a week.
To me, anything that makes it easier for people anywhere to get craft beer is only going to increase the number of new customers that are out there drinking it. If you have a brewery that opens up down the block, you're going to go drink there. If you have a new tasting bar, a new liquor store that carries 400 bottles, you're going to go try it out. And so to me, the proliferation of places is only going to create new customers because it increases access, and anything that increases people's access, if it's easy to drink craft beer, they'll go do it. If you've got to drive 5 or 10 miles to go find a good beer, you're just going to go get whatever you can get down at the local store. But if the local store, has 50 different brands for you to choose from, you don't need to go anywhere to drink great beer. So I think that accessibility is huge.
So the increasing amount of breweries is going to help grow the overall share of craft, you think?
Absolutely, because you're not going to drink the same thing every day.
So I guess the real question is, is there a ceiling? Is there a bubble?
Sure, absolutely. Sure. Especially when you're getting breweries out there that are in it for the wrong reason or making bad beer. That's just, you can't do that right now. It's impossible to get growing with it. I think that at some point in time, and off-premise retailers are already starting to look at this horrible term called SKU rationalization, right? If this isn't performing, you're going to be kicked to the curb and you're going to be delisted. It's very close. I mean, maybe a year from now, we're going to start seeing SKUs get pared back a little bit. And we talk about grocery quite a bit. We're like, wow, Vons and Albertsons, they're killing it around here. They're offering a lot of really good craft beer sets and craft beer choices, but they're taking it from other shelf space. So if it's coming from wine or hard alc, how much more can they support feeding into that? Well, go look at a store. They're running out of room, right? So unless they start taking sunglasses away or something like that, it's dog food, whatever. And that's possible, but they are going to hit a law of diminishing returns.
Well, hopefully they don't take flip-flops away.
That's right.
Yeah,
exactly.
I think we're in a real transitory phase right now, which is that there's a lot of breweries that opened in the last 10 years or 5 years or 1 year, and they either are going to find their fall line or they're going to go out of business. But they're going to go out of business because somebody else comes along who drags people away from them. And this has been the craft beer business. I mean, there's breweries in this town that have been open 20 years, 15 years, 12 years. Some of them are going to close in the next few years because they no longer have the ability to just be in this environment. They don't exude enough to continue. And so someone's going to take their market position. It's a Darwinian function. It's, yeah, you might not be the best, but you haven't been the last buffalo at the back of the herd. So now they're gonna fall off, and so people are gonna open. People who aren't gonna make it, but people who did open will make it long enough. So is it 5 years, 7 years, 3 years, whatever? We have lots of breweries in this town that don't deserve to be open, but are, and we have lots of breweries in this town who just opened who deserve to be open for a long time. It's just gonna become the how do you go from open to close, and there's gonna be some closings, and they deserve to be gone, and they may have opened last year, and they may have opened 20 years ago. It's a collective piece. I think there's somewhere between 70 and 90 breweries, in my mind, in this town that probably can exist, and we're at 70, so what does 90 look like, but how many close between here and there?
I think I really want to make this clear that we've kind of said San Diego is saturated, and it's, it can't handle much more. From what we're experiencing, that's not necessarily the case. We consider it a more mature market than Los Angeles, but we're still seeing fantastic growth coming out of San Diego. We were at a point where I was trying to determine whether or not we were going to hire a lot more feet on the street from stone distribution standpoint for San Diego, and we're able to still do that. We're adding a lot of jobs down here in San Diego to support the growth that's coming out of craft beer.
And it seems like there would be more growth. I mean, especially from the distributor level. You have El Knife that just came into town. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it seems like that would be indicative of continued growth.
Well, and
if
again,
they think they can open up an operation here in San Diego to distribute.
Yep. Southern California is still the holy grail for craft beer. I mean, you've got brands like Bell's and Founders and Ninkasi that aren't here, right? Those are big breweries that are selling a lot of beer everywhere but Southern California. Everywhere is a strong word, but you know what I'm trying to say. So when those brands eventually come into town, you know, distribution is going to be important, and brands like El Knife and Stone and other ones are hopefully people that they consider. So I still think that there is a lot of headspace in San Diego to continue to grow. Our market share virtually is higher than it is in other parts of the country, but it's nowhere like Portland.
So
right?
what are we here? We're what?
I want to say like 12% down here, somewhere in that range. So it's
Market share for
yeah,
craft?
For craft, for all craft.
Okay.
Somewhere in that neighborhood.
And
It's
up
still
and down-
really low.
Is that
Say again? Yeah, it is.
Still really low.
And that's across everything, just all craft beer. Now in LA, it's closer to 4 or 5 share.
Yeah, that would be a reasonable number. A lot more opportunities for growth up there, right? Go to a baseball game up there. You're not seeing a lot of craft beer being poured. You're seeing a lot being poured down here at Petco. So look at the airport. You know, we've got our restaurant opening up in Lindbergh Field coming very soon. They're supporting local restaurants at the airport. All of that market dynamic is only going to benefit breweries that are opening up right now.
Sure. So that sort of gets back to kind of our main theme of the discussion, and I'll toss out one final question, and we can all have some beers and maybe discuss this after the panel's over. This equilibrium question, this competitive versus collaboration question. For years, the craft beer industry has been this collaborative environment where everyone gets along. When I first started with BevNet and Brewbound almost 3 years ago now, the only answer I got from people when I asked them, you know, when is it going to get really competitive, was, oh, we're all pals, we're all good buddies. And that seems to have changed over the last couple of years, where there is this talk of competitiveness now, and it's more of an open discussion. So what's the environment like in San Diego, and where's the balance? Are people still collaborative here, or have the gloves come off, and it's just too competitive to be everybody's your friend?
I'll follow on that one. I'm 17 years in this business in this town. 10 years ago, I knew everybody making beer in this town. Today, there's people sitting out here that own breweries that I don't know. Partly my fault because of the environment that we're running, and partly just the expansiveness of it. We're trying to get out and meet these people. You know, I suppose if this was a Braveheart analogy, you know, we're all going to stand arm in arms and we're going to fight the good fight. There's people in this town who don't know me, and there's people in this town that I don't know who are making beer, and collectively we're supposed to rise the tide together and go shrimping, and Bubba Gump is good. But until the day comes where we can all look at each other in the eye and certify that we are on the same page and we believe we're on the same page, but it's going to battle, and you're going to battle right now, and you got to look at the guy next to you and understand. I can meet the people in San Marcos, I can meet the people in Vista. There's people in East County and South Bay and places in San Diego that I haven't been and I need to get to. It's partly my fault, but it's partly just the largeness of it. In the time we've been sitting here, 3 breweries have opened, and I can't help it. There was one that opened in Fallbrook the other day, and that's right up the road from here, and I had no idea they were opening. All we can do is collectively get together. The best thing that we have going for us is that we have the San Diego Brewers Guild. It's one of the few city guilds that exists in this country. It does actually provide for the legacy of this town. It started back when I had my first brewing job in 1996. It's been around. It is one of the few pieces of cement that does glue this community together, but that can fracture at a moment's pace. So we have to work at it. That's the simple answer from here.
I think one of the things, you know, we started, and it's like, oh, it's us versus Budweiser. And then it was like San Diego versus all the NorCal and Portland beer that was coming down.
Yeah, fuck LA.
And then we kind of, you know, hit a nice plateau as San Diego kind of became the thing. And I still feel that people get along, they want to collaborate. But what I said, you know, earlier is that, you know, maybe certain people are collaborating with certain people. It's not that the community's fractured, but maybe just people are kind of breaking up into groups a little bit. You know, in terms of, are you a North County brewery? Vista's got its own Brewers Guild now. You know, I just think different areas, different people, you know, are finding like, hey, let's do things together. And it's not maybe county-wide as collaborative as it was, but that's to Tommy's point. It just can't be. You can't have, you know, 80 or 90 people always working together. You work in small groups, you find people you like, and you work with them. And I don't think it means that we're at each other's throats or we're adversarial, or that San Diego breweries are really trying to knock other San Diego breweries off tap or off shelf space, but just that I think that you've got to have better brand awareness, certainly as you move out into the marketplace. And I think that's what we've seen as a lot of these breweries mature, certainly Green Flash, as they moved into their new Mira Mesa facility, they have a whole new brand awareness of everything that they're doing, and that's really allowed them to grow and spread their message to San Diego rather than just being a brewery up in Vista. And I think that's been very important for them.
I think the biggest, and Chad mentioned Napa earlier, so I'll fall on this one. My point is that there's 200-something wineries in Napa. And because of appellation rules and TTB regulations, if you make wine in Napa and you get to use the word Napa Valley on the bottle, it's a big deal. It's a huge deal. So if you get to make beer in San Diego County and say brewed and bottled, as your stuff does, brewed and bottled in San Diego County or North County, it's always been about San Diego. And so no matter what happens, if I don't know the guy who opens a brewery in Chula Vista, it doesn't mean that we don't share the same thing. The issue I have is back to the Napa piece, 200-something wineries in Napa. They don't all make good juice, but they all get to use the word Napa Valley on the bottle. So as long as we all understand that if you're in San Diego and you want to evoke the sensibility that we have become this sort of environment, this great place for beer, collectively we either have to agree to disagree or agree to agree. But there is going to be an issue in there in that we can't all agree to agree all the time. So we're okay. We're okay as long as everyone's supporting the tide that floated this San Diego boat, which has taken 20 years.
Well, that certainly leaves everyone hanging, I think, and thinking about it for a while. Guys, I got to thank you. This was a great discussion. Thank you to the folks that joined us up here earlier for the startup panel discussion. Thank you to everyone who attended and everyone who tuned in on the live stream. Give a round of applause for these guys. Obviously, I mentioned it earlier, couldn't have done it without this guy, Tomme Arthur and the Lost Abbey. They have been one of the best hosts ever for this thing.
22 years.
And the reason you guys are all here free tonight is because of our sponsors over here. So if you like what we did here, we do this for a full day at our business conference coming up on December 5th over at Paradise Point. We'll have folks like Tomme speaking, being announced soon. So hopefully you'll come and join us. Thank you.
Thank you.